Hey everyone, welcome to podcast number 19. Today we'll be focusing on the 1950s. Topics to be covered are going to be post-war anxieties and the economic growth, civil rights struggles of the 1950s, and suburbs and social conformity. So let's go ahead and get started. So after World War II, people were very anxious, and I think they're anxious for a very good reason. The United States was in this Great Depression for most of the 30s, and only World War II pulled the United States out of the Depression. And so a lot of people thought, well, what's stopping us from going right back in? What's stopping us from going right back to the horrible, horrible days, of the 30s? And at first, there was a lot of economic uncertainty. There was a fall in GNP. Prices rose 33%. There were strikes going on everywhere. And people were very, very concerned about how are we going to reintegrate all of these returning veterans back into society. As of 2013, when this podcast has been made, there's talk about how we have unemployment, over 12, 13 million people are unemployed. We consider that to be a major problem. Well, imagine going back to the 1940s when the country was half as big, and now you had 15 million people coming back from war. That's a big problem. So people were really kind of freaked out for, what are we going to do with these guys? These guys just fought a war for us. How are we going to bring them back into society? And the government really comes through here, and we see some really, really good legislation getting put into place here to help these people, help these veterans come back into American society. What the bill is called the GI Bill. Technically, it's called the Readjustment Act of 1944. But basically what the GI Bill does is it, in a variety of ways, tries to help veterans get back into society. Okay, it gives them a year of unemployment benefits. So for those who are trying to find a job, it's going to give them a year of a cushion to find said job. For those younger veterans, they're going to give them financial aid to go to college. And many, many veterans do take advantage of that and go to college, and we see this big boom in college enrollment as a result. And the Veterans Administration also provides $15 billion in cheap loans to build houses. So now all these veterans who are coming back from the war, now they can go ahead and afford to buy and build their own home. Now that's also going to be a huge boom to the local economy, or the national economy, because now you're going to have all these new homes being built. $15 billion in loans to build new homes, that's really going to help the American economy. Okay? And so from 1950 to 1970, we see this huge, huge economic boom taking place in America. Some people would suggest this is America's golden age. Just look at American dominance here. America makes up 6% of the world's population, but they control 40% of the world's wealth. And throughout the 1950s, 40 million new jobs are created within America. And these aren't just blue-collar jobs. These are white-collar jobs, meaning that these are jobs, like office jobs and stuff like that. Not jobs you wear like blue jeans too. Okay? And so in the 1950s, we do see an expansion in the middle class. Okay? The middle class is doing very well for itself. We see people starting to buy lots of cars. People are buying TVs. Women are entering the workforce now at a much higher rate. We also have a very cheap supply of oil, which is really allowing the economy to boom. Consider this too, that at the time of this podcast, gas is creeping towards $4 a gallon. That's a lot of money. Not only does it take money out of your wallet, but it's also going to make the people that have to transport the food and all the clothes and all the other things that we buy to make those prices go up. And so having cheap oil is a huge, huge advantage. And during this period of time, we have very cheap oil, which fuels our economic boom. We also see for the first time a vast majority of American children are going to schools. We see farm productivity skyrocketing, with only a small percentage of the people actually being farmers. And we also, because of the Cold War, see this permanent war economy popping up. We see lots of money being spent in the aerospace industries, electronic industries, plastic industries, and with all this military spending, we also see some of that innovation, or some of that spending, leading to innovation in the private sector with passenger jets, computers, and other stuff like that. And so, for the most part, the economy is ripping and roaring for the couple decades after World War II. Okay, and it's putting America on top of the world as far as being the world's powerhouse in terms of economic. Excuse me. The automobile, as I previously mentioned, this is kind of its heyday. In 1960, there are 60 million cars in America, and we also see families starting to have 2 cars per family, which is a big deal. President Eisenhower, the former general during World War II, along with Congress, he's able to pass the Interstate Highway Act of 1956, which basically is a serious upgrade to America's roads and highway system. The highway system is going to connect all the major American cities. It's going to provide for lots and lots of jobs. It's going to allow for that good old American road trip that hopefully all of you have been on. It's also going to make it easier for Americans to move to the suburbs. And it's going to allow people to kind of spread out away from those cities. Okay, so a lot of good things happening, throughout the 50s. All right. We also see the American veterans who are returning from World War II. We also see that they're ready to have families. Throughout the 1930s, throughout the early 40s when the war was going on, people were choosing not to have children. Whether it was because the Great Depression, obviously economically, it wasn't a good time for people, and then World War II, a lot of the men were gone. And so when good times finally do hit, in the late 40s, early 50s, into the 60s, people are kind of making up for lost time here. And there is a huge amount of kids that are being born here, essentially. In fact, at the time of this podcast, around 78 million Americans today are boomers, which would mean they're about 26% of the population. And they're a huge boost to the economy in the 50s because now you have all these little babies. And parents and grandparents are going to buy them all this stuff, and they're going to be this huge boost to several industries. Okay, and then when they grow up and become workers, they're going to be a huge advantage to the country because they're going to be paying taxes and being productive citizens. So the boomers here do a lot for America, and now it's kind of interesting because now a lot of the boomers are like in their late 50s, early 60s, and so now people are kind of worried about. Now that this huge productive part of our nation is now kind of graying, how are we going to pay for these guys? How are we going to pay for Social Security? How are we going to pay for Medicare? So now it's kind of instead of being a boom for the economy, now it's kind of like, oh no, kind of a lag for the economy. Anyways, a lot of consumerism takes place. You can really compare the 20s and the 50s pretty well. A lot of advertising, a lot of new products are online. Good economic times. People are making some good money here. And we see a lot of Americans, once again, buying new consumer items, time-saving things like washers and dryings, new refrigerators, ovens, shopping malls pop up. Americans are buying TV. Fast food comes around. Disneyland. Kind of modern. The modern American consumer is kind of here now, something that we're very used to, obviously. We also see a lot of conformity taking place in the 1950s. Suburbs look incredibly similar. A lot of these suburbs, like Levittowns, are almost identical. And a lot of people think it's really lame that so many Americans are so similar. There's not a lot of individuality. People have the same houses, people wear the same clothes, people watch the same TV shows. Everything is just so similar. Nothing's really unique. And we see several groups of people that kind of reject that life. Many people found the 50s life unbearable. Okay, whether it was men, women, or young kids, there definitely was some resistance to this kind of conformity that we see taking place during the 1950s. There were movies, there were music, and literature that rejected this. You have James Dean, Rebel Without a Cause. You had the Beat Generation, which was a group of writers that rejected American society. And you had rock and roll, which, once again, many people thought of as the devil's music, with people like Little Richard and Elvis Presley. Okay, so once again, as we go through the 50s, you should be able to think back to the 20s podcast and your 20s studies that the 20s and the 50s are very, very comparable. This is very interesting. Okay, we also see the beginning of the modern civil rights movement popping up here. Last time we talked about civil rights was during the World War II podcast. And we talked about the Double V campaign, where you have victory against fascism and victory against racism, essentially. And throughout the 1950s, we see many victories for African Americans in their quest for equality. Okay, so a couple important things to mention here. We have Jackie Robinson, who is the first African American to break the color barrier in Major League Baseball in 1947. You have President Truman, who ends discrimination in the federal government and also desegregates the armed forces in 1948. You have the landmark case Brown versus Board of Education, 1954, which overturns Plessy versus Ferguson, which had set up the principle of separate but equal. Brown versus Board basically overturns that and says you cannot separate the races. So basically ends segregation in America's schools. Okay. You also have Rosa Parks, who basically refuses to give up her seat on a bus to a white man. And this leads to the Montgomery bus boycott, where African Americans in the city of Montgomery, Alabama, refuse to use the buses. And the Supreme Court actually steps in and assists them and said, hey, look, you cannot segregate anymore. That is illegal. We also have the Little Rock Nine. You have these 9 individuals who, 9 African American students who basically go to a high school in Little Rock, Arkansas. The governor of the state refuses to let them go in to the school, and President Eisenhower actually uses the National Guard to enforce federal law. And so you see all these very important things happening in the 1950s, very much setting the table for the successes of the 1960s with the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act and all that stuff. Okay, so kind of wrapping up here, got a couple more things to go and we'll be done. We also see during the 50s a major migration into what we would call the Sun Belt. And the Sun Belt on that map there shows you, basically the Southern America, go figure, right? We see this massive migration taking place. And it's kind of interesting because you can kind of see the massive migration through the movement of sports teams. You had the Brooklyn Dodgers move to LA, you had the New York Giants move to San Francisco. And we look at why are people moving. It's basically because of jobs, but also because air condition has made the South livable and people feel comfortable living there. We also see lots of jobs in oil and space and defense industries. And once again, the American economy is just rocking and rolling, and people are going to the jobs. Once again, just some cool stats here to show you just how powerful America was at this time in the 50s. We made up just 6% of the world's population, but produced 50% of the world's products. So that's pretty incredible. Now, with this migration, you're also going to see a major shift in political power. So as populations move, so too do congressional seats. So you're also going to see a change in that as well. Okay. So anyways, guys, we're going to stop there for today. Please go ahead and feel free to follow me on Twitter. Check out my website for any chapter PowerPoints or copies of these podcasts. Email me any questions and follow me on YouTube. So thanks, guys. Hope this helped.